listening to Reckless Creatives, a Pipeline Artists original podcast, where Sadie Dean and Jeanne Bowerman share the candid truth about the challenges and benefits of living life as artists.
I think we should start the episode. Hey, Sadie Dean.
Hey, Jeannie.
We sometimes have a pre-show combo, and the pre-show combo today was boundaries. I think people need to really learn their boundaries.
Yeah.
And it's okay to tell people to fuck off if you just... As a matter of fact, I remember seeing one of those memes with Helen Mirren when they asked her, I think I probably said this at some point on Reckless, maybe not. I think I repeat myself too much. But anyway, it says if she could go back in time, she would tell her younger self to tell people to fuck off more often. So embrace that, everyone. I did check to see if fuckoff.com was taken, and I got one of those security alerts. So it was probably telling me, the internet was telling me to fuck off.
Right.
Okay. So how many times can we say that in this episode? Let's not move. Let's move on.
Let's move on to something actually great.
Okay. You're never going to see this on YouTube because I'm done trying to put things up on YouTube. But I just made this big, wide, surprised, happy, excited face with my hands like jazz hands.
Yep.
And I think I scared Sadie.
You did.
I have to show Sadie something because we had set goals. Remember, we've had those goals. And then it's just like, oh, Jeannie's busy. Oh, Jeannie's busy. Oh, Jeannie's volunteering for this. Jeannie's running a cemetery. Jeannie's running a beach, blah, blah, blah. Well, Jeannie is working on those goals, baby. Let me show Sadie something. Hold, please. Oh, and this isn't even all of them. Look at this. I'm showing her a stack that's like probably 1.5 inches thick of filled out index cards for my novel outline. Baby.
Incredible.
I know. Like, look, there's like really words on them.
I am so proud of you. Are you going to put that on your awesome whiteboard?
I'm struggling with the whiteboard on this one, even though the whiteboard is gigantic. I did scribble tons of thoughts, different things. Like if I was walking around and I had an idea for something, I went upstairs and I wrote it on the whiteboard. So it would all be contained and I wouldn't lose it. I also have a big, oh my God, let me show you what else. There's 67 pages of notes on the outline. So the index cards refer to these 67 pages. Move those. And then this is the new game changer. So I'm taking a Ken Follett BBC Maestro class.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm also listening to Pillars of the Earth at the same time because I've never read that before. So Ken is like a crazy outliner. Like, I don't know that I could, I mean, I'm apparently trying it Ken's way. But one of the things Ken does, he's got spreadsheets and he's got like 3 different screens. I don't have I don't have a room to do that. I can't do that. But before I went down to the trip, for the trip, I went down to my little local bookstore, shop local, everyone. And I got this like kind of like a journal,
nice.
But it's, 8.5 by 11, like a normal piece of paper. One of the things that Ken does, which I think is really fascinating. Okay. So I would take the index card and I would put what it was at the top of the page. And then I start writing ideas for the scene underneath it. But so then I have just like a list of here's some of the things I think would be great to happen in this scene. So this cool thing that Ken does is next to each idea he has for a scene, he puts an up arrow or a down arrow next to it. So like if it's positive for the hero or if it's negative or whomever, doesn't have to be this hero, but whomever the scene is about, so that then he can move them around when he actually goes to write them. So maybe he says, oh, I need something negative. Let me look at something that happens negative because he wants it to be like a roller coaster through the scene.
Mm-hmm.
I apologize, Ken, if I'm not explaining this correctly. And then each scene in when he does in his little journal, because then later he's got the journal. This is how, how much those could probably go for auction? like the journal
Mm-hmm.
that he used to write Pillars of the Earth, that has sold
Mm-hmm.
27 million copies, by the way.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, in the novel world, you've got the POV, the point of view of what you're writing. So first person, third person, whatever. So what he's decided is whoever has the most at stake in that scene is the person's POV he uses. But it can get very confusing, and a lot of agents like freak out if you use too many people. And he's
Mm-hmm.
discovered that he feels the trick is, and I agree with him because I'm listening to Pillars of the Earth, and this is exactly what he does. He said he has like 5 or 6 different characters whose POV is in the books. But what he does is he never repeats anything. He has his whole outline, but it's not like he'll do one chapter and say, one section and say, oh, this is what the hero's thinking. And now let's say the same scene, but what his
Right.
lover is thinking. He doesn't do that. It has to keep going forward. And you don't necessarily know what the other person was feeling in that scene. Like just keep going. And it works so well. It keeps the story moving. Oh my God, I just listened to a scene of Pillars of the Earth that was just so messed up. So this is nothing to do with our guest.
But it is exciting.
It is. And I probably should have saved this for like a catch-up one. Oh, delete.
But that is
delete,
exciting. No, I'm glad you're doing it. You're inspired. That's awesome.
I am inspired. It's good. And it helped because I was at VoucherCon last week, which was I had to fly to Nashville, and I got stuck in the Nashville airport for 6 hours. So amazing what you can accomplish.
Yes.
But also, before we move on, I just have to tell you, I had the unbelievable honor of moderating an incredible panel at VoucherCon. It was like a pinch me panel. Mick Herron, who wrote Slow Horses. Joe Finder has written a lot of novels, and he's also had 2 movies. Let me just stop for a second. The panel was like a book to film, the pros and cons of book to film.
Mm-hmm.
So Karen Dion, who has The Marsh King's Daughter. Harlan Coben, who has 10,000 things. He's not only a novelist, he's also a showrunner. He's got a ton of shows on Netflix. Is that it? Oh, and David Morrell, who is the father of Rambo. He wrote First Blood. I just sat there like pinching myself moderating these people. It was incredible.
That is like a
Heavy
bucket
hitters.
list. That is pretty awesome.
Amen, sister.
Yeah. What was like the biggest like aha moment for you during that panel?
Well, I know a lot about book to film, obviously. I taught a wonderful webinar for Writer's Digest and Script Magazine on the subject.
That's right.
We can put a link in the show notes because I think it'll be available on demand.
It is. It is.
Oh, giddy up. So I knew a lot about the process, but it was fun to hear their personal stories. One thing that I really appreciated was David Morrell's insights into the contracts. He retained all the rights to write anything in print about Rambo. So like back in the day, earlier, like they could make a movie about Rambo that he had nothing to do with, but only he would be allowed to novelize it.
Mm.
Because back then they used to actually do the opposite a lot. Like they would make books about the movies after the movies,
Right. Right.
And now it's flipped. But I thought it was genius of him to retain those rights because he's done it. He's written books post movie. I thought that was really interesting because I didn't realize that he had done that. And I thought that was so smart. Also, Harlan Coben is hysterical. He's so funny and very tall. Just saying. Poor guy can't walk into a room without people just being like, oh my God, there he is. Because he's just such a presence, physical presence.
Stands out.
And he was so sweet. There were these 2 little old ladies who came up to him, and he acted like he had nothing else more important to do in the world than to talk to them. It was just, all of them, just so gracious, so lovely. And it just gives you hope for this world that there are nice people out there.
Just on that panel. That was it.
Correct. So Sadie Dean, I'm going to shut up because what have you been doing?
Absolutely nothing. And it's great.
Oh God, I love that. I love that for you.
No, it's I've been fairly busy the last I don't know the last time we spoke, but I wrote like 2 or 3 shorts. There's a project that I'm attached to direct and produce, and we submitted to a grant. And one of my other shorts, been submitting to grants and just trying to get things made without my money because it's expensive.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and then, yeah, I finished my feature and got that out to some people and just waiting to hear back. And on the music side of things, the album's finished and I've got some really cool things happening with that. In the spirit of what the album is, I've gathered like 6 of my favorite filmmakers in my little circle, and each one has taken on a song and
Oh
are
my
making their
God.
own music video. And
Sweet.
it's I've seen one of the productions, and all the other pitches have been really cool, and I'm super excited. Um, so that'll be coming out like early next year if I do it right. So
Oh my God, I
yeah,
love
just a lot of cool
this.
things happening.
I love this. Look how reckless we're being and how creative we're being.
Well, I have to give credit to my wonderful husband on that because I was like, the last thing I want to do is create all this content to promote my album and make videos and just all the stuff that comes with it. Why can't I just make the music and people find it that way? But in this day and age, that's not
Doesn't
how it
work that
works.
way.
So he was like, some really great and cool filmmakers. Why don't you, like, in the spirit of what the album is put this project together with different great artists and have them do some like experimental videos for you. And I was like, that is such a great idea. I'm taking it. Thank you. And every filmmaker I pitched it to, they're like, I love it. And uh they've come back with like full-fledged, like actual production music videos where I'm like, please don't spend your money, but they're so in love with having the opportunity to do something like this that they're just having a blast. So it's really cool.
Love that.
Yeah.
That's fantastic. Look at us. And you know who else is really productive? Jessica
I think I have an
Hobbs.
idea. Yeah, Jessica Hobbs.
Like, how many minutes into this are we before we finally start talking about our guests? Jessica, I know you're listening to this, and I apologize. Sometimes we just get excited. I discovered Jessica because she actually works with me at Pipeline, and I invited her to do a symposium about turning her book of anthology of short stories into a narrative podcast and how she did it and everything you have to do to produce a narrative podcast. And it was such a great symposium. There's so many things. I mean, we have regular podcasts here, but it's very different to do narrative one, and some things overlap. But I just found it really interesting. And so I asked her, would you like to be a guest? Because there's probably a bunch of people who don't know anything about this. And Sadie and I are big believers in people taking one piece of work and turning it into other mediums. I mean, just look at Sadie's example. She's got an album and now she's got filmmaker friends making music videos. I mean, you got to kind of shake it up sometimes and think of different ways to promote your stuff. And those music videos will help promote her album, and her album will help promote the music videos, blah, blah, blah.
Yeah,
So,
she shared really cool insight that I would just never have had thought of. One, because I'm not really in that world, but it's exciting to like the different avenues of owning your own IP and what you can do with it, and just the pure joy she had out of the process was really cool and super inspiring too.
the other thing too, like there's short stories now. Like we have a couple short stories on Pipeline Artists that are actually short stories of feature scripts. So like even with the anthology of short stories, you could still take those short stories and turn them into a feature, turn it into a podcast, turn it into a short film. Like, but the podcast is cool, as she'll explain, because the money bar is a lot lower. And Sadie, since she doesn't like to spend money, would appreciate
Starts adding up $100 here and there.
as we look at the 4 guitars and a sitar hanging on her wall. She only likes to spend money on certain things.
Very specific. These are my investments for the future.
That's right. So we should probably shut up and get on with Jessica.
Let's do it.
Da-da-da-da. So Sadie, Jess did a couple symposiums for us. The in and outs of being a script supervisor and another one about producing a narrative podcast.
Very cool.
I will put links to those in the show notes. So I'm going to do something that I normally don't do. After the hi, Sadie Dean. It's been a day, everyone. It's been a day already. So I want to formally introduce you to Jessica Hobbs. And so I'm going to read her bio. Jessica is a writer with a BA in film studies from the University of Colorado Boulder and has a background in opera. We will not be asking her to sing, but maybe. Do you sing, or is just a background in like producing opera or something?
Yeah, no, I was backstage for opera. I was not on the stage.
I was
as
hoping
fun
we
as that
could
would
get.
have been. I'm not that impressive. I'm not also an opera singer.
Yet.
I guess I could be.
Yeah. So she's also been in TV production and film festivals, and she's got a passion for all things strange and unusual, which is probably why she agreed to come on Reckless Creatives. Her scripts have landed as finalists in the Austin Film Festival, and the Hayes Horror Fellowship, the Lady Filmmakers Festival, and she's written for publications such as MS in the Biz and The Wrap, Pipeline Artist, go figure. And yes, we will link to her articles in the show notes. But basically, we're here to talk to her about her first book, The Witch and the Other Tales of the American Gothic, because she turned that into a narrative podcast series. And so that's why we asked her to come on, because Sadie and I are all about taking one medium and turning it into another medium and casting as many nets as you possibly can. But I just have to say this because as I'm looking at Sadie's screen and her guitars all behind her, and I think one of them is a sitar, is that what it's called?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
I was kind of hoping she could play while Jessica sang opera.
Well, she also, from reading her bio, she also has a background in vaudeville, so maybe we could do a little shtick of something, and
Oh God, everybody get ready.
I also backstage for that one, but I can do my best.
All right, we know what we will make it happen.
Do impressions of my performer colleagues.
I got to start by asking, when you wrote the book, did you first think, because you also were a screenwriter, did you write this book also as a script or just as a book?
Just as a book. I had written scripts and like so many writers, threw them out to contests and festivals and got a few laurels on some. Nothing really ever happened. I mean, I think this audience is well aware of how hard it is to get a script produced. And so I actually just decided to change it up completely from the beginning with this project. I started writing it during the pandemic, during the darkest days of the pandemic in the fall, when it had been going on for a good 6 months. It was clear it was not going away still anytime soon. And I started reading a lot more, not really reading physically because my eyes were so tired from so much Zoom, but laying in bed and listening to audiobooks as a way to just give my eyeballs a break. And started revisiting Gothic horror books, some of which I'd never read before, classics like Legends of Sleepy Hollow. And I just thought, you know what, I want to write these kinds of stories too. And I want to go back to writing, a fictional short story, which then became a whole collection of fictional short stories.
And then what made you say, ooh, maybe a narrative podcast?
It was actually my husband's idea. He is a composer and a very good one, and also shares my love of the strange and unusual. He has scored short horror films and done, kind of video game scores, really moody, really dramatic. And so when I was putting the book together and decided to publish it as a collection, it started just as a one-off story, just wrote it to write it. And then that gave me a second idea, which gave me a third idea. And when that train started rolling, he pretty early on said, we should do this as a podcast series. We should record it so that I can write music for every story.
That's awesome. So did he start writing the music first for you, so you could just kind of get an idea of the tone and of where you wanted to go?
Mm-hmm. We started pretty early. As I was writing the early drafts of the stories, I was putting together playlists. And I always do that anyway when I write, to really just get my head into the vibes and the tone. But very early, as soon as I was putting them together, I was sharing them with him, and he was starting to put ideas together of his own.
That's awesome.
Mm-hmm.
So like, okay, so we had a audiobook narrator on my other podcast, The Story Will Save You, which was really fascinating to talk to her about acting out those roles of, and taking her acting skills into that. So this, and obviously a narrative podcast is different than an audiobook, but can you speak more to like, what is each episode like? Is it like a little segment of the story? And then you're adding obviously music and things that aren't on audiobook, and then getting acting talent. I mean, like, because you also produce the whole thing.
Mm-hmm. I did so much of it from beginning to end. My husband, being a composer, is also an audio engineer, so that was awfully convenient. But otherwise, other than the audio cleanup and the polishes and the music writing, I was doing all of it. I recorded the narration, I did all of the editing, and I hired all of the voice talent, put together sides for them, directed every episode basically, and pieced it all together. So it really was a ton of work. Very worth it, but a ton of work. And narrating, I don't know that it's really all that different from an audiobook. Aside from the fact that I did hire actors to voice all of the characters. So that's what made it a little more dynamic, a little more drama, a little more cinematic, really, even though it's only audio. But for me, just reading my own stories out loud into a microphone, it was very even keeled. It was very, I don't want to say that it was not energetic, because it was. You certainly have to adjust your voice to keep up with the pace of the story, where we're at in the story. You got to put a little bit of emotion into it, but the narration is what sort of grounds it at the same time. So, to really give the listeners the foundation for what's happening, so that the actors can then give it an extra level of emotion from there. So I actually found it to be really enjoyable. I really liked doing the reads. I really liked being at the microphones. And I, would happily do that on future projects. In terms of, how the podcast was structured, some narrative podcasts will be, an overarching season will be telling one story. And so they will tell it in segments. Ours was contained for one story per episode. So they're all give or take an hour. I think the longest is probably about an hour 15. The shortest is about 50 minutes. And it's a short story collection. So one episode, one story.
So when you're saying like 50 minutes, so just to give the audience a concept of the work that goes into a 50-minute episode, how many hours would you say it would take you to create just that one 50 to 60-minute episode? Did you ever calculate that out?
Oh, I'm sure I did. I can't quite remember. I think I blocked a lot of all of this out.
I don't blame you.
But if you remember how exhausting it was, you'll never do it again. But
yeah,
it kind of depended, because the first episode for sure was what took the longest. Part of that being because it is the longest story. That's the one that's an hour and 15. But another factor on that too was that it was my first narration. So I did more takes of everything, because I was still getting used to being in front of the microphone. And the more takes you have to go through, of course, the longer that takes in the edit to choose the ones that you want best and how they're going to match with each other, and go by it just paragraph by paragraph all the way through the story. It's also a little more dialogue heavy than some of the others as well. So that was more editing that I had to splice in with my own voice, were the voices of my actors. So the more dialogue heavy ones took longer, because it was going through multiple takes of theirs as well. And then that also takes more editing on Robin's part, because my actors were first of all phenomenal. And I was exceedingly lucky that I had to give them so little direction. I gave them a lot of direction up front and was just extremely clear about what I wanted from the character. I had to go back and ask for different takes so infrequently because they just all were professionals and got exactly what I wanted right away. But they were all doing it remotely. They were all sending me files from their home. They all had different setups. So the more dialogue heavy episodes involved a lot more balancing of the audio as well, of the files, to make it sound like these people are in the same room.
Even just editing this podcast, oh my God, I think my head would explode. Thank you for letting me know that I will never create a narrative podcast.
You never know. You never know.
No. Sadie, don't give me a script. No, not happening.
Or hire an editor. Just throw money at the problem.
That would be a lot.
Which I did not, which is why I was editing well into, 1, 2 o'clock in the morning.
I love the idea that it's just like one episode is one short story. So it's a satisfying thing and you're not like left hanging, because life can get crazy. And what if it's a month or so before you're doing the next one? How often would you recommend people who are doing audio podcasts? How often would you recommend like getting the frequency of episodes? Like sometimes Sadie and I will put a couple out a month, and sometimes it'll be depending on life. So with yours, did you find when you look at the stats of your listeners and stuff like that, did you find that it was better? Like, was there some sort of pattern to how frequently you would put them out that you felt worked the best?
I didn't try different strategies because there are only 7 stories. So I just went to it with the intention of 1 a month, because I felt that was a good amount of time to release one, market it a little bit, announce it, send out the newsletter, send out the emails, give people time to listen to it. And then as soon as maybe they had listened to it or they bookmarked it and started to forget about it, then they'd get the next email a month later, the next episode. And a big reason why I wanted to do it that way is one, I felt like that was a good length of time to remind people about the series. But more importantly for mine, because it is genre, I wanted to build up to Halloween. So it was important for me. And we didn't get them all out before Halloween. It went in through November and December of last year, but it was important for me to get the right lead time going up to Halloween. So we started in May, and we released the first one in May, and then in June, August, etc. July, August. There's another month in there. So that I wanted most of it out by Halloween. I wanted all of it out by the end of the year, basically, which is
And guess what? I'm just going to, and then I'll let you ask your question, Sadie. It's September, so we can get this one out before Halloween.
Woohoo!
That's right. Yes, we will. I'm curious, now that it's been out and this podcast has been out with the book, have you seen like an uptick in sales for the actual physical copy of the book?
Yes. It absolutely helped in sales of the book, no question. And now I'm seeing, speaking of getting into the season, I've had a few more sales in the last few weeks. I feel like the book sales are starting to ramp up again as well, because we're getting into that season where people see the cover and think, yes, I am in the mood to read that. I will pick up that copy of that book.
Yeah.
And they should.
Yeah.
Did you get a agent for the book, or did you self-publish a book?
I actually decided to self-publish it. The agent game was in such a weird place in 2020. And it's a weird thing, just always in general. It's just a very strange game to play. And so I did speak to a few of them. I got some helpful advice, and I spoke to a couple of small publishers, but I really did find that the publishing industry is in a very similar place as the film industry right now, where you have your huge studios or publishers. So, you've got Disney and Warner Brothers and Simon and Schuster and Penguin Random House. And then you have a whole lot of independent artists and a whole lot of just teeny tiny little publishers that offer minimal support. And so I spoke to a few of them, but I wasn't thrilled with the terms that a lot of them were offering. One of them wanted me to run a Kickstarter for all the marketing costs and then give them the money. And that was a hard no.
Yeah.
So I just, and I come from the world of indie film. I worked for Sundance for 8 years prior to what I'm up to now. And I was still working there at the time of this book. I had seen a lot of artists just put their own stuff out there and just get it done. And I decided to be one of those artists.
I think anybody who would say yes to an Kickstarter is somebody who had never done a Kickstarter.
It is so much more work than you think. And
So
you
much
better
work.
believe that money is going to me at the end of that work. And
100%.
not someone
Yeah.
else.
But I'm curious if do you want to write more books?
I do. I am working on I'm actually working on 2 new books. One is a novel, but I sort of put a pin in that one because I'm doing another short story collection, this time pivoting to supernatural romance. So still supernatural, still strange and unusual, but I decided that there was just a lot of fun to be had with people falling in love at the Halloween season. And I felt like there was such a range in there where it could be the very cute East Coast practical magic fall vibes kind of romance, or we could go all the way into the, you fall in love while you're staking vampires together kind of romance. So that's my focus right now. So I do intend to publish another book. I'm really hoping it'll be out by this time next year.
Did I ever tell you that I got married on Halloween?
No, you didn't.
No.
I did. I got married on Halloween. The night before the wedding, we have like the rehearsal dinner. We had at the time I had a motel, and so a lot of our hotel guests were staying at our motel, like our wedding guests rather were staying at the hotel. And we had a Halloween party, and I was dressed as a belly dancer for the Halloween party the night before the wedding because I was dressing as a virgin the next day.
I love it.
Which one is the costume?
I love that, and I'm glad you told me that because actually that was what gave me the idea to do this collection was that I learned more couples get engaged or married on Halloween than Valentine's Day.
Oh my God, that's wild.
I know, right? And so that immediately did not. If somehow it didn't surprise me at all to learn that, although it was still such a light bulb. So I guess it was kind of a surprise, but it was such a light bulb of like Halloween is romantic. Romance stories about Halloween. I have to get on this immediately. So I did.
Yeah, that's so cool. Yeah, I would never think that either. Like you would think, Valentine's Day is such a hallmark holiday now that you can't not get around it. But yeah, fall. Absolutely.
Valentine's Day is stupid. I hate it.
Yeah.
It's just like it's just such a forced thing. Really, I don't know. Ugh, I hate Valentine's Day.
It's forced, and it's also like at least make all the chocolate good. It's
Right.
just kind of the worst. It's all high fructose corn syrup, which doesn't make me feel romantic at all. It just makes me feel sick.
Right. Yeah.
So like when you look back at this whole process, like from short story to short story collection to narrative podcast, what do you wish you had known about it before you started that might have helped or maybe might have made you run away and not have done this?
I wish I would have known that it's a pretty big learning curve, learning how to self-publish just in terms of the actual technical use of the websites. I went through a pretty big common one called Ingram Spark, which I prefer to something like Amazon because they can order into bookstores and they're actually quite easy to use once you have your book on there. But when you're getting your book on there, the technical specifications are very, very, very rigid. And I kept having my my book cover file rejected over and over again. I didn't understand why. I mean, I probably submitted, 15 or 16 different files and it would still say, it's the wrong size. It's the wrong size. I'm like, what do you mean? And so I'd adjust the margins by millimeters and it would still get rejected. And that was one of the longest parts of the process for me. Overall, I think I did a pretty good job of asking a lot of questions from people who'd been through it before I started it myself, with like the artists who did the layout and that kind of thing. I did try to do my own cover design first, and that was kind of a big waste of time. I actually did do the sketch, like the original cover design is actually mine, but I tried to learn it in Photoshop. I tried to source other photos, like buy other people's pictures and merge them together. And that was such a waste of time. Like I should have just called a graphic designer immediately and paid someone who knew what they were doing, which is ultimately what I did. I sent him the sketches and he did a wonderful job. The guy that I found, artist based in Colorado named Elias Armeo. He did a wonderful job with my sketches. And then he also is the one who added the border and he did the fonts and he added some of his touches to it as well and did a great job. And I should not have bothered doing any of that myself. I should have just called him immediately.
Yeah. I mean, Matt and I were just at BoucherCon writing conference in Nashville last weekend, and they've got a room where they've got people's books and we're walking through and looking at the books, and you really do judge a book by its cover.
It's true.
I've seen some books that I'm confident that the writer is a great writer, but yeah, no, that's cover's got to go.
It's really important. It's like when you're in screenwriting or TV writing and you have to have like the perfect log line. A very, very, very solid elevator pitch, because you're not getting past the gatekeepers unless you nail that. And that's sort of what a book cover is like. It's, you have to give exactly what your story is about, exactly how, like what the tone of it is and how the reader is going to feel about it in order to even get them to open it.
Crazy. We actually have a couple symposiums. One of them, Karen Richardson did about everything. I mean, I'm telling you everything you need to know about self-publishing. It's like crazy, the details she goes into. Not to put, this is a little symposium commercial at a logline workshop that we do every quarter with Meredith Allen that is so good.
So helpful. Loglines are so hard.
So hard.
And I still hate them. I mean, I've gotten to be a much better writer. I've been doing this for a long time, and I've gotten a lot more confident in, probably 80%, 90% of what I'm doing. And that last 10% is freaking log lines. I hate them.
Yeah.
Yep.
So
Agreed.
Let me ask both of you a question. Do you guys, and this is off topic of narrative podcast, but it's not really because it's still creation and story. Do you do your log lines before you start really writing, or do you write, get into a little bit and then be like, okay, let me just take a step back, create the log line to make sure I stay focused, and like, or do you hate them so much that you just wait till it's all done and you absolutely have to do it?
Yes. Oh, for me, I write one while I'm doing the outline of the story. So I do it very early. But after I've been through multiple drafts of the story, I have to do multiple drafts of the log line as well. So the one I start with is never the one that I end with.
It's just sort of like a first draft log line. So it doesn't have to be perfect. You don't really care. Just got something down.
Exactly.
Yeah. What about you, Sadie?
About the same. I start with the log line and then rewrite it over and over again. And then once it's time to send it out, I rewrite that log line and then realize I don't even know what my story is about anymore. And it's all confusing and I hate it. And why did I do it? And yeah, it's terrible. And then you're like, you finally get it, but you're just like, why is this so hard? Like I know this story like the back of my hand, and now I can't even summarize it into like 10 words or something. It's ridiculous.
So with the narrative podcast, let's focus, kids. That was statement to myself, not to the two of you. It's like if Cher on Moonstruck could like slap me right now, like that's awesome. Wake up, Jeanne. Pay attention. So with the narrative podcast, like, would you do another one?
It's not the plan right now. I feel like this time I'm going to focus on getting the book out there. Again, because of Halloween, I've got a certain amount of time. I really like to get it out next summer because I want the marketing lead up time to Halloween. That's a little more important to me than doing a whole narrative podcast series again, because it really just was so much work. I think doing both simultaneously would either mean that I have to push it out to the next year or really, 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 really burn myself out again. I don't mean to say that it was ultimately a bad thing. It really wasn't. It was still extremely worth it. But I had a lot going on at the time. I had 2 survival jobs. I was heavily pitching before the strike shut some stuff down. And then during the strike, I was doing some intensive work on my pitches to, prepare for the future while I was putting out this book, doing the podcast series. And I was starting a short film at the same time. And I wrote another short film at that time. And I went to Austin, and I had so much going on that all totally worth it. It was a lot that I don't foresee happening again in 2025. So I think book and podcast separately, not in tandem this next time. So if a podcast happens out of the next one, it will be 2026.
So can you talk a little bit about, for maybe the authors out there who might be listening to this, who don't know anything about narrative podcasts, but maybe think, oh, maybe I'll see if I can hire somebody to do one, or, that kind of thing. Now you've got to market a book and you have to market a podcast, and then marketing the podcast loops around to marketing the book, and it becomes this kind of circle. So maybe just a handful of marketing tips that you used for the book, and also some that you used for the podcast.
Yes, that's a really good question. And that is exactly how it felt. It felt incredibly symbiotic. It was kind of a win-win. When I was marketing one, I was by default marketing the other. I did start a newsletter, started that on Substack, and I sent out announcements every time when I released the book, when I released every podcast episode, and then anytime, of course, something was going on with the book, like there was a reading or a signing or a panel or anything I had managed to get myself on. I was on other podcasts talking about horror or talking about independent creation, anything like that. Always sending announcements out for all of those things. I also started using TikTok, which I never had before. And I had to admit, I actually liked it. I was a little hesitant because I'm just no, not another social media platform, but it ended up being really fun. And, again, every video I posted about one was by default a video I posted about another. And it worked out really nicely. I had podcast interviews. That was some of my favorite way to promote the work. I had the Substack. I had the TikToks. The TikToks were really helpful for the podcast. I always noticed that I got an increase in downloads every time I put out a TikTok video. And for those, I would often, talk about the inspiration behind the specific stories. I traveled a lot because I wasn't busy enough last year. So I also did a lot of traveling, and I happened to be in some of the places where my stories took place, because they're all spread out across the country. There's Maine, New Orleans, Puget Sound, Chicago. I went to Maine and Salem, which isn't in my book, but come on, it's very extremely related. I went to New Orleans. Just a few months prior, I'd been in the Pacific Northwest. And so I was doing TikToks from all of those places, why the vibes were inspiring to me, what I was learning there about myself, and they're all historical as well. So then I'm looping in the history buffs, and I'm at the cemetery in Portland, Maine, where all these soldiers are buried from the War of 1812. And I'm talking to them about that. So, the marketing was actually really fun a lot of the time, because I just got to talk about stuff that I personally found interesting that was relevant to the.
Well, next time you're in the Northeast, you can come to the cemetery that I run and do a little TikTok video from my cemetery.
You run a cemetery?
I do.
What does that entail?
Well, I thought I was just agreeing to be the secretary of the cemetery and this volunteer work, so that I could get the sign back for the building that my mother owns in town that has our antique shop in it. It's the oldest building in town, built in 1811. Oh, and we have ghosts. Whole thing you could do. Just come right here. We could do a whole
amazing
thing about all that.
Let's do it.
And then And then it apparently turned out that I was also agreeing to be the treasurer, which I didn't realize. So someone walks into my antique shop one day and said, "Hey, I need to buy a plot." Like, oh my God.
So people buy
So
cemetery
I
plots
sell,
from you?
yes, I sell cemetery plots. When somebody dies, the funeral director calls me and says, "Hey, we need to arrange what day can we bury the person. And then we need to get the grave digger." Yeah, it's a whole thing. But how about those narrative podcasts?
How about those podcasts?
For this one specifically for The Witch, you found your platform for how you were going to sell your book and all that and get it out there. When it came to like finding that platform for the podcast itself, what was that research like for you? Or was it just whoever had good recommendations for you? Or yeah, I'm so curious.
Podbean is a really common one. And yes, I did get that as a recommendation from a friend who'd done a podcast before. Hers was not narrative. It was interviews like this one. But she found that platform to be very easy. And so I decided to use it. And it really is. I mean, it uploads your episodes to all the platforms that you want it on. It's very easy to get it on Apple, Spotify, iHeart, Google Play, Amazon, just anything. Like you literally just click a button and it'll upload it there for you. So I typically direct people to either Spotify or Apple, but honestly, wherever you get podcasts, you can find it. It's very easy. And it also just very user-friendly in terms of checking stats and downloads. And, it's not terribly expensive. I think it's like $125 a year or something like that. Yeah.
Yeah, like
125 is not too bad.
And I think it's better to do the platforms where you pay, because then your stuff is up there. It doesn't like disappear. Yeah. You don't want to lose all that work for sure.
Yeah. And that's a big deal in the digital age, is like, sure, you do have to pay for that kind of thing, but it's just what it is. Digital things disappear all the time. You run out of storage somewhere, and so it'll just stop backing up your work, or it'll start, deleting your large files, or whatever it is that if you're neglecting it at all, things will just kind of go missing. You really do need to take care of it. And that's fine. It is what it is, but you got to pay attention.
Totally.
I want to just kind of wrap it up by asking, because we talked about what is the thing you wish you knew, but I'd like to end on a positive note. Like, what is the thing that has maybe surprised you that was the most enjoyable about the process of, either or the book, creating the book, the anthology, or the podcast? Like, what's just the thing that was like, wow, this was amazing?
I had never narrated before. I was a little surprised by how much I enjoyed that. I kind of saw it as something to do. I paid my actors, not a lot. So again, that was one huge reason why I wanted to be crystal clear about what I wanted from them and minimize the time I was asking for them, because I wasn't paying them very much. But I did. It was important to me to do that. And I couldn't afford to hire a narrator to do that much reading. So the reason I did it, frankly, was just because I wouldn't have to pay anybody. And then I ended up really, really enjoying it. And I think one of the most rewarding, like fun, not even a surprise, but one of the most rewarding things I got out of the whole experience was that I was so tired last year because I was working so hard on this book and podcast, as well as all that other stuff I listed earlier. It was an extremely busy, packed, exhausting year. And I look at pictures of myself recording in the studio, and I just look so happy. I don't look exhausted. I was, but I didn't look it. I was just happy. I was just enjoying being there. I was so fulfilled by doing my own project. I've spent most of my career being in a supportive role on other people's projects, producing, just, supporting in any way, like I was doing through Sundance, hosting, kind of making connections for other people. And I was so fully invested in my own project and so excited that I was getting these extremely talented people to support me, these actors who were so perfect with the roles that I gave them, these other friends of ours in like the composing community, other people who had experience with audio work were giving me great advice. Marketing people were giving me great advice. Other podcasters were giving me great advice. And it was just really gratifying. And I was just so grateful for all of it.
That's fantastic. And it's also really fun to like just learn something new.
Right. It was totally new for me. Totally new. I had never done it before, and I just made the decision that it was going to work out, and it did.
Sort of like when Sadie said to me, Sadie's looking at me like, what is she going to say? When we started this podcast, Sadie edited the first episode or first few episodes. And then I was like, I can't let you do that all the time. I really need to help you. And she goes, okay, just get GarageBand out and go to it. I'm like, well, how? And she was like, you'll figure it out.
And you did.
That was it. And I did. I dove in and figured it out. I'm not ready for a narrative podcast.
No, but Jessica, that is so cool that you got that kind of support after being that support for so many people. You just never know, like, am I the one to do it? And obviously you are. So that's awesome.
Yeah.
So congratulations.
Thank
That's really
you.
awesome.
Thank you. It was a really exciting shift. And I'd been working with a mentor last year who was just so wonderful, such a wonderful resource to me. And this was specifically on pitching for TV, but there was a meeting where I was speaking about my project to someone else in the industry. And I kind of slipped into host mode where I was mindful of time and, just kind of asking her the questions and blah, blah. My mentor called me afterwards and she said, why'd you do that? You didn't need to. And I told her, oh, well, I was just so used to doing that when I hosted these things at Sundance Collab. And, we have these, I understand how precious their time is. And so I want to be mindful, blah, blah, blah. And my mentor said, well, yeah, but that's my job. You get to be the artist. And then my head exploded.
Right.
But yeah, and that was all happening at the exact same time that I was launching this. I think I had only put out one episode so far, or maybe not even. I think I was finishing that episode at the time that happened. And I'm the artist now. Oh my God, that's crazy. Crazy wonderful.
That's so awesome. No, that's awesome. It is very different. It is very different. You do have to like shift your mindset too, to like get in that headspace and not think of like, well, how do I help this person? And you're like, no, that's not my job right now.
Exactly. It's, what it's kind of like, it's sort of like being it's the difference between being a bridesmaid and a bride.
Right.
Just a little bit like you run around in circles doing this for your best friends. You pick up the flowers for them. You help get them ready. You do their hair. You do all the bridesmaid things, right? You run interference on whatever family drama is happening or whatever. And then when you're the bride, you just got to focus on you and just be your radiant self. And that's kind of how it feels, the difference between being the artist and being the supporter.
Yep,
totally. Well, thank you so much, Jessica. This was really great. And I hope people are maybe got a little glimpse as to what it might be like if they want to try to do this for themselves. And it's not just like a book or short stories that you could adapt into a narrative podcast. You could adapt your feature script, your short script.
Because we know like even a short film is a heavy lift and it can be very expensive and it can be very hard. And if it's prohibitive for whatever reason to get your short film going, you just don't feel like it's happening. I think this is a great alternative. It's still a lot of work, but it's very different. It's so doable as a solo artist on a much smaller budget. I absolutely recommend it.
You know what else would be cool? If you had a regular podcast where you're like talking to people or whatever, but then you just threw in little clips from your narrative podcast as like a little promo clip kind of thing. I mean, you could do like a whole Halloween podcast. You could do a witchy poo content.
That's true. That is true.
Right?
Actually, my husband and I have talked about that, about launching a podcast of our own. It would be because we were a couple working on this project together. It did kind of give us the idea to do a whole series of talking to people who are both in the industry, which is hard. And sometimes those artists work together on projects, sometimes they don't. But it's a very different dynamic when you're both artists as opposed to when only one of you is. So that is something that we have talked about. It just hasn't found its way to the top of the to-do list just yet.
Right. You have enough to do.
And
Yeah, you have
didn't-
another book to write. You have two new books.
2 new books.
Yeah.
2 new books, and more spec scripts. I'm going to Austin again this year. I just found out I'm second round again.
Congrats.
Thank you. So
That's great.
lots going on, but that's certainly an idea.
So when we get this live, we'll have a link to your book because Halloween's coming up and we have established that it is the most romantic holiday out there. So you need to get your current book, listen to the podcast, light some candles, a bottle of wine.
Some good chocolate.
Good chocolate, exactly. Or even better yet, fall baked goods, get an apple pie going or something.
There you go.
Mm-hmm.
We just saved people's relationships.
Yeah, we did.
Reckless Creatives is a Pipeline Artist original podcast. Like, subscribe, and follow us on social media at Pipeline Artists. And find more info at pipelineartists.com/listen. Until next time, stay reckless.